Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. Part 1, The First Raindrop. The forest had been waiting. For hours, perhaps days, the clouds above had stirred and gathered, whispering to one another in low tones, promising what would soon come. And now, at last, the first raindrop fell, quiet and solitary, striking a wide fern leaf with a sound so soft it could have been imagined. But it wasn't. It was real. And it was only the beginning. Elia stood at the edge of the tree line, the hood of her worn coat pulled loosely over her head. Her boots sank into the softened moss as she stepped forward, deeper into the woods. She was in no hurry. There was no one left to hurry for. Behind her, the world she knew had been fading for years, its cities too loud, its skies too bare, its nights too restless. But here the quiet had a presence. The silence was a listener. And now the rain, gentle and steady, had begun to thread through the canopy like a needle through cloth, stitching her fully into this new place. She carried little. A canvas pack, heavy with soaked wool and dry provisions. A bundle of kindling wrapped in waxed linen. A journal tucked deep in the inside pocket of her coat, its pages warped from old storms. And in her hand, a copper lantern, its glass fogged with the warmth of a low flame. The trees welcomed her like old friends, their dark, dripping limbs parting just enough to guide her along the familiar trail. Mud clung to her soles, but she didn't mind. In fact, she liked the weight. It reminded her that she belonged here, part of the forest, part of the rain. As she walked, the rain thickened, slow and deliberate, like a lullaby from above. It struck every surface differently, the broad leaves clapped softly under its touch, the fern sighed, the earth itself seemed to hum low and deep. Elia listened. Every sound mattered now. In a world emptied of voices, this music was sacred. It wasn't long before she came upon the old clearing. It looked as she remembered, damp, mossy, encircled by elder trees that leaned in like gossiping elders. In the center, still untouched by wind or time, was the fire pit, a ring of stone blackened with soot, fringed by wet needles and ash. She lowered her pack and crouched to touch the edge of the stones, as if making sure they were real. Then, with practiced care, she unwrapped her bundle of kindling and stacked it into a neat little pyramid. The flick of a match sounded loud in the rain, and within seconds, a tongue of flame leapt up, eager and golden. It licked the damp air and danced in the lantern's glow. She sat back and watched it take. The fire cracked gently, warming the silence. It was a humble flame, no bigger than her hand, but it gave the clearing life. Shadows returned to the trunks around her. The mist seemed to part in deference. And from somewhere deep in the trees, a distant owl called once, long and low. Elia let her eyes close. The world would not find her here, not tonight, not for many nights. And if it did, it would have to cross through a very old forest, one that had learned to whisper secrets, one that never forgot. The rain fell on, steady and soft. And the fire crackled, holding the darkness at bay. Part 2, Beneath the Canopy. By the time the sky had turned a deeper gray, the fire was burning steady and low, its embers glowing like little coals buried in orange. The smell of the wood smoke curled around Elia like a shawl, mingling with the damp scent of wet bark and the musky undertone of earth soaked deep by rain. Every breath she took was filled with that wild, living fragrance, the kind you could never bottle, the kind you could only earn by staying. She leaned back against a moss-covered log, her coat pulled tighter, and watched as the canopy above gently shifted and sighed under the weight of falling water. Every leaf caught the rain a little differently. Some held it like cupped hands until it spilled over, others shuddered with every drop, releasing beads like glittering pearls. Now and then, a larger drop would plummet from high above and strike the forest floor with a satisfying pat. No wind, no thunder, only the pure rhythm of the rain. Night crept in slowly, inching between the trees like a cautious guest. The fire's glow reflected faintly on the undersides of the leaves, and shadows deepened in the spaces between trunks. But the forest wasn't empty. Far from it. Somewhere nearby, there was the delicate rustle of movement, a soft crunch of leaf, a twig bending under cautious weight. Elia turned her head slightly, listening, but didn't stir from her seat. The sound didn't alarm her. It was familiar. The creatures of the forest knew her now. They kept their distance, but they watched. And occasionally, they ventured closer, emboldened by curiosity or a sense of shared stillness. She reached into her pack and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside it were small parcels of dried fruit and nuts, a few crumbs of smoked bread. She ate slowly, letting the quiet be her companion. Above, a crow called once, sharp and echoing through the rain, then went still. It reminded her of the way city sounds would briefly pierce the quiet, then vanish, like a memory trying to surface before sinking again. Elia had not spoken aloud in days. She didn't need to. Her thoughts had grown quieter with each passing night, as though the deeper she went into the forest, the more the noise of the past slipped away. The ache, the worry, the rush of machines and lights and voices, out here, all of it softened, until only breath remained. She stood slowly, brushing the crumbs from her lap, and wandered toward the edge of the clearing. Her boots left shallow prints in the mud, soon softened by the rain. Just beyond the circle of firelight, the forest looked different, not threatening, but vast. Ancient. Like it had been waiting for someone to notice it again. She pressed her palm to the bark of a massive cedar. It was slick and cool, but pulsing with something that felt alive. In the hush, she could almost believe the tree was listening. Maybe it was. She leaned in close and whispered, not words, just breath, and stood there a moment longer. Then, with quiet steps, she returned to the fire, fed it another few twigs, and settled back into her place. The heat brushed her legs, the rain touched her face like a soft hand, and the forest continued to breathe all around her. And somewhere beyond the veil of trees, something else breathed too, slow and deep, like it had just begun to stir. But Elia didn't fear it. She simply listened. And let the rain carry her into the deeper night. Part 3, The Watchers. The fire had dimmed to a smolder, casting a red pulse across the clearing like the faint heartbeat of something still alive. Elia lay wrapped in her blanket, her back cushioned by a bed of dry pine needles she'd carefully arranged before dusk. The rain had eased for now, though not stopped, and the silence it left behind felt strangely louder. As if the whole forest was holding its breath. She opened her eyes. Above her, the canopy was a patchwork of shifting black and soft gray, gently breathing in the slow rise and fall of the wind. The stars were hidden, veiled by cloud, but she didn't need to see them to know they were there. Their presence could be felt, humming faintly in the spaces between the branches, like a quiet promise whispered behind a curtain. A sharp crack, a twig snapping, sounded from just beyond the trees. Elia didn't move. The sound hadn't come from something large. It was too clean, too crisp. Not heavy enough to belong to a bear or wandering deer. It was something lighter. Quicker. Intentional. She turned her head slightly on the bundle beneath it, her eyes open now, watching the edge of the clearing. The fire's last flickers offered little light, but she didn't need light to feel it. There was something standing just beyond the trees. Just out of reach. She didn't fear it. Whatever it was, it had been here last night, too. She hadn't seen it then, but she'd felt it. The presence had a rhythm, like someone watching patiently from the dark, not hiding, just waiting. Not hunting, just observing. The forest had its watchers. That much was clear. Elia didn't try to reach for the lantern. Instead, she kept still, her breath slow, eyes fixed on the place where the shadows deepened. And there, yes. A faint shape. Tall and narrow. Slight movement, like a cloak rippling gently in the breeze. No sound. No eyes she could see. But watching. Definitely watching. She blinked slowly. "You're back," she whispered, the words barely more than breath. They floated into the night and dissolved. The figure didn't move. It didn't need to. Elia felt no fear. If it had wanted her gone, it could have done so already. She sensed no threat, only a presence. A sentinel, maybe. Or something even older. Perhaps the forest had guardians. Perhaps it simply wanted to understand the small, fire-making creature who slept beneath its boughs. She turned her gaze back to the fire. Let it flicker behind her eyes. In the morning, she would not mention what she saw. There would be no need. Some things in the forest were not meant to be spoken of. Some things were only meant to be felt, and honored, and left unnamed. The wind whispered a single gust through the branches above, scattering a cascade of droplets down onto the clearing. The shape at the forest's edge vanished, gone not in haste, but as if it had melted back into the trees. Elia smiled faintly. Then she closed her eyes again. And slept. Part 4, The Hollow Path. The rain had stopped by morning. Elia woke to the scent of wet bark and ash, her breath visible in the cool morning air. The embers in the fire pit were still alive, barely. She crouched to stir them, feeding in a few dry twigs from the stash beneath the log, the ones she'd kept shielded under waxed cloth. The flame bloomed lazily, stretching like someone waking after a long sleep, and with it came warmth, and the familiar, calming crackle. The forest was quiet, but not silent. Dew clung to every surface, and when the wind stirred, tiny beads fell in shimmering waves from the leaves above. Somewhere to the east, a woodpecker worked rhythmically at a trunk, and in the far distance, the soft, low call of something moving echoed through the hills. Not a howl, not a bird call, just a sound too far to identify. The kind that made the forest feel like it was dreaming out loud. She stood slowly, stretching out the stiffness in her limbs. Her boots were damp, her coat sleeves chilled, but her breath was steady and calm. There was a rhythm to the forest now. It welcomed her like a body welcomes its own breath, unnoticed at first, but essential once understood. Today, she would walk the hollow path. It wasn't on any map, not anymore, if it ever had been. But Elia had seen it before, years ago, when she first wandered these woods as a girl. Her father had spoken of it only once, in a half-whispered story by candlelight. A path that went beneath the trees, not beside them. One that dipped into the folds of the land, sinking between roots and fallen trunks, winding through the spaces the forest forgot. Some called it the hollow. Not many found it. Fewer returned. She followed the brook upstream, boots sloshing through dark moss and slick stone. Her lantern hung at her side, though it wasn't lit. The day was dim, the sky a flat, drowsy gray, but it gave enough light to travel by. She kept her eyes low, scanning for the shift she remembered, not a clearing, not a break in the trees, but a sloping angle in the land. Like the earth itself had yawned and left a scar. It took her hours. By the time she found it, her legs ached, and her hands were flecked with dirt from steadying herself along the way. But there it was. Just past a fallen birch and beneath a wide-branched oak. The forest dropped suddenly, like a small gorge, shielded on all sides by overgrown ferns and thick moss-covered boulders. The trees leaned in tighter here. The light dimmed unnaturally. She took a breath and stepped down into the hollow. The sound changed immediately. Quieter. Not muffled, absorbed. Every footfall was swallowed by the moss, every broken twig a mere suggestion. Even the birds above seemed hesitant to sing here. Elia felt no fear, but her pulse quickened, not from danger, but from the strange sense of being watched again. Or followed. Not in malice. Just, studied. The further she went, the more the path narrowed, as if it didn't want to exist for long. The trees grew impossibly close. Vines arched across the trail like ribs. Her shoulder brushed one of them, and it shuddered, not from the touch but from something deeper, like it remembered her. She paused. Somewhere behind her, a soft thud echoed, like a footstep. Just one. Elia didn't turn around. She simply lit the lantern. Its warm glow spilled out around her, illuminating the path ahead, but it also touched something further down the trail. A glint. A smooth surface, hidden between two thick roots. As she stepped closer, the shape revealed itself, a stone. Not placed naturally, but carved. Covered in lichen, worn smooth, but unmistakably shaped. A marker. She brushed a hand across its surface. Symbols. Nothing she recognized. Nothing human. And beneath her feet, the ground breathed. Just once. A deep, slow inhale. Elia stood still. And listened. Part 5, The Breathing Earth. Elia didn't move for a long while. Her hand remained pressed gently against the stone marker, the moss cool beneath her fingertips. The breath beneath her feet, if it had been a breath, was gone now. The ground lay still again. But something had changed. The air was thicker here, denser with silence. It wasn't heavy in a fearful way. More like the pause between thunderclaps, the quiet before something speaks. She stepped back, careful not to disturb the roots curling beside the path. The lantern's flame swayed gently, casting soft amber across the close bark and winding vines. The forest in the hollow seemed older. Not just in years, but in memory. Every surface felt like it remembered being touched. Every leaf held the scent of time. She moved forward, slowly. The path dipped again, narrowing between two tall, splintered trunks that leaned in close like conspirators. Beyond them, the hollow deepened into a wider basin, an ancient sink in the landscape, filled with fog. The mist was low, clinging to the ground, stirring faintly with invisible currents. It curled around her boots and ankles, moving as though it recognized her presence. She raised the lantern higher. Shapes emerged. Stone circles. Small ones, barely more than raised humps in the soil. Others were taller, narrow, and crooked, arranged in spirals and half-moons. Most were broken, cracked down the center or leaning at strange angles. Elia walked among them with reverence, her breath catching lightly as the flame revealed carvings on their surfaces. Symbols again. Different this time, smoother, flowing, like water etched into stone. She didn't recognize the language, but it didn't feel foreign. It felt forgotten. A gust of wind passed low across the basin, and with it came a sound. Not a voice. Not quite. More like a tone. A resonance. Low and rich, vibrating just at the edge of hearing, like a cello in the dark. It seemed to rise from the stones themselves, and for a moment, Elia wondered if the earth had begun to sing. She closed her eyes and listened. It wasn't music exactly. Not in the human sense. But it held the shape of something melodic. Something meant to be remembered. She sat, cross-legged in the mist, and let the song wrap around her. Time softened. Minutes became indistinct. She didn't sleep, but she drifted, somewhere between waking and dreaming. In that space, she saw flashes of things. A flicker of firelight over ancient bark. Figures moving beneath heavy cloaks of green and bone. Eyes in the dark, not threatening, just watching, always watching. Then the sound faded. Not abruptly, but like a tide pulling slowly back from the shore. Elia opened her eyes. The mist was thinner now. The stones quieter. But something lingered in the air, something that hadn't been there before. A memory, maybe. Or a trace of one. She looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the echo of what she just felt. She knew one thing for certain now. The hollow was not empty. And it had not forgotten. The watchers, the stones, the song, they were part of something much older than she had ever imagined. And she had stepped into its story. She stood, brushing the damp earth from her coat, and turned back toward the path. The trees loomed quietly around her. And as she walked, the wind began to rise again, carrying with it the scent of smoke, and the distant, unmistakable sound of footsteps not her own. Part 6, Echoes in the Smoke. Elia moved with measured steps, her boots pressing softly into the moss-lined floor of the hollow. Behind her, the mist slowly swallowed the stone basin again, folding it back into secrecy. But something followed her out, a sound, a feeling. The memory of that deep-toned resonance still buzzed faintly in her chest, as if it had left its signature behind. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling through the branches with long, whispering fingers. She felt it curl against her skin, then dart away. The canopy here was tight, yet the forest made room as she walked, branches leaning just enough, roots staying still underfoot, as if it respected her passing. Then came the smell. Smoke. Not from her fire. This was different, older, richer, carried on the wind like a message wrapped in ash. It reached her in subtle waves, not enough to see, but unmistakable all the same. Wood smoke mixed with something faintly sweet, like dried herbs and cedar resin. It reminded her of incense, or ritual. Elia tightened her grip on the lantern and followed the scent. The hollow's path climbed gently now, the trees thinning just enough to allow pale light through the mist. Each step felt deliberate, like she was crossing a line not meant to be crossed without invitation. Ahead, the trail widened slightly into another clearing, hidden, sheltered beneath the arch of two leaning birch trees, their trunks silver and peeled like old paper. At the center was a blackened ring of stones. A fire had been here, not long ago. The ashes were fresh, still warm, and thin strands of smoke coiled up like spirits trying to rise. But no one was there. Elia approached slowly. Kneeling, she brushed the edge of the fire ring and found small footprints. Bare. Human, perhaps. But small. Not childlike, just slight. The prints circled the pit, then disappeared toward the far side of the clearing. She didn't follow them, not yet. Instead, she looked around. It wasn't just a campsite. There were objects laid out neatly on a flat stone beside the fire, tokens. A thin string of bone beads. A carved wooden figurine, smoothed by time and handled often. And a single feather, long and dark, with flecks of silver near its tip. It shimmered faintly even in the low light. These weren't just left behind. They were offerings. She sat on her heels and stared into the faintly smoldering pit. A strange thought came to her, I'm not the first to come here. And I won't be the last. There were others who walked these woods. Maybe not often. Maybe not recently. But this was a place of passage. A place where the veil between the forest and something else grew thin. The silence here was deep but not empty. She could feel it pressing at the edges, not to scare her, but to remind her. Every stick, every stone, every flicker of smoke held a memory. The fire that had burned here before hers had not been for warmth alone. It had been for calling. For speaking. For listening. And the forest had listened. Elia reached out to the feather and held it up to the lantern's glow. It caught the light with an unnatural glint, as though it still carried something from the one who left it. She tucked it into her coat. Then, with one last look at the ring of ash, she followed the footprints into the trees. Behind her, the last wisp of smoke rose from the blackened stones, and curled into the shape of a single, slow eye. Watching. Part 7, The Veiled Trail. The footprints led deeper than the path itself. Elia followed them through underbrush and ferns, past trees whose bark was covered in long vertical scars, natural, maybe, but symmetrical enough to seem intentional. The ground was soft from the rain, and the tracks were easy to follow, but the further she went, the more the forest around her began to shift. The trees grew closer together. Their trunks twisted subtly, like they had once grown straight but had since bent towards something unseen. Vines dangled overhead, not in wild tangles, but in straight, silent curtains that brushed against her shoulders as she passed through. The air had changed again. It was still damp, still rich with the scent of loam and moss, but now there was something else. A quiet electric tension, like the moment before lightning strikes, or the breath you hold before opening a door you aren't sure you should. Her hand brushed her coat pocket, where the silver-flecked feather rested. It was warm now. Faintly. As if it were aware. She stopped. The footprints had vanished. One moment they were there, pressed into the earth like ghostly invitations, and the next, they simply ended. No turn. No scatter. No fading. Just, gone. Elia stood still in the thick quiet, her breath misting gently in front of her. She turned slowly, lantern raised. Trees surrounded her on all sides, tall and dense, their bark darker here, as if they had soaked up more than rain over the years. No trail. No direction. Only silence. And then, the whisper. It was not a voice, not in the human sense. It didn't come from a mouth, and it didn't carry across the air in a single line. It came from around her. From the trees. From the leaves above and the ground beneath. Like the entire forest was murmuring in tones older than speech. She couldn't understand the words, if they were words at all, but she felt the meaning in her bones. You are still walking forward. It wasn't a warning. It was a truth. She moved again, not by compass, not by track, but by instinct. The feeling that something ahead was waiting, not ominous, just expectant. As if the forest had paused for her to catch up to something it already knew. Soon, the terrain changed again. A rise in the land led to a natural archway, two massive stones leaning together, draped in moss and wet ivy. Beneath it, the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from pavement, though the temperature remained cool. Elia stepped beneath the arch and felt a tingling crawl across her skin. Not painful. Not cold. Just a veil lifting. On the other side, the forest was different. Quieter still. But brighter, somehow. The light filtering through the canopy had a pale gold tint, even though the sky was still gray. Every detail was sharper, colors deeper, outlines more defined. The trees no longer felt passive. They watched. Not with suspicion, but with clarity. Like old beings waking from a nap and realizing a guest had arrived. Elia didn't speak. She simply breathed in. And let the veil settle behind her. Part 8, The Standing Grove. The golden light made everything seem older. Elia walked with care, her boots pressing softly into the spongy forest floor. Beneath the canopy, everything shimmered just slightly, not brightly, but enough to suggest that the air here held something more than mist. Every surface had a kind of weightless sharpness, like memory preserved in light. Ahead, the trees began to space apart. Not randomly, deliberately. They formed a ring. A wide grove opened up in the middle of the forest, the center sunken slightly, as if it had been pressed by a great wheel or walked upon for generations. The grass was shorter here, thick and deep green, beaded with dew. Moss ran in lines between the trunks like veins. And standing at exact intervals around the clearing were 12 tall stones, each one carved, each one different. Elia stepped toward the nearest. It was etched with a spiral, thin and shallow, worn smooth at the edges. She reached out and traced the pattern with one finger. The stone was warm. Not with sunlight, but with presence. As if the carving held memory still inside it. The others, too, were marked. She walked slowly around the ring, studying them. Some held symbols she recognized from the hollow. Others had images, simple, almost childlike. A tree split in half. A bird with too many wings. A circle inside a hand. One bore only a single dot, perfectly centered, deeply carved. None of it made sense. But all of it felt true. At the center of the grove, the ground dipped just slightly, forming a natural bowl. In it sat something unexpected, a pool. Shallow and clear, not more than a few feet across. Its surface was perfectly still, though no wind stirred it. Not a single leaf floated on it. The water reflected not the sky, but the canopy above, and something else. Elia stepped closer. When she looked into it, she saw not just the branches above, but herself, not as she was now, but as she had been. Flickers of her childhood, playing among tall grasses. Her fingers brushing bark as she ran past trees she couldn't yet name. Her face, younger. Wiser, somehow. Then the image changed. She saw herself in this very grove, seated beside the pool, her lantern set beside her, unlit. But something else sat opposite her, just out of focus. A shape. Humanoid, tall and still, like a shadow wearing the memory of a body. They weren't speaking. But they were listening. Together. The image faded. Elia blinked and stepped back, the pool rippling now for the first time. Around her, the standing stones vibrated faintly, barely perceptible. Just enough to feel in her feet, not here. Like the hum of a mountain held still for too long. This place wasn't sacred in the way ruins are. It wasn't abandoned. It was occupied. Not by creatures, but by intention. She understood now. The forest hadn't led her here by chance. It was remembering with her. This was a place for reflection, but also for meeting. For messages. For witnessing. And something, somewhere beyond the trees, had taken note of her arrival. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply sat at the edge of the pool, her lantern beside her, and waited for the forest to speak again. Part 9, The Figure at Dusk. Elia waited beside the pool as the golden light began to shift, deepening into the amber hues of a forest evening. The mist no longer lingered low to the ground. It had risen, curling gently around the standing stones like smoke from some unseen incense, drawn not by wind but by purpose. She felt it before she saw it. The presence. Familiar now. Like a shadow just out of reach. She didn't turn immediately. Her breath slowed, her shoulders softened. The pool before her remained perfectly still, even as the world around it changed. The light dimmed. The grove deepened in silence. And behind her, somewhere near the edge of the ring of stones, something moved. One step. Then another. No threat. No urgency. Only presence. Elia turned. The figure stood just beyond the first stone, half shrouded in mist, taller than any person she had seen, but not by much. Cloaked. Not in fabric, but in darkness so gentle it almost seemed to breathe. The outline flickered faintly, as if it was part of the air, part of the forest, not separate from it. No face. No voice. But eyes. Not eyes in the human sense, more like 2 points of awareness. She couldn't see them, but she felt them. Meeting her gaze without aggression or greeting. Just recognition. Elia stood slowly. The lantern remained by the pool, still lit, casting a faint glow behind her. She didn't reach for it. She stepped forward, into the space between the pool and the stones. The figure didn't move. She raised her hand, not to wave, not to beckon. Just to show it. A gesture of openness. Her other hand went to her coat pocket, and she drew out the feather. The silver glint caught the last rays of evening light. It shimmered. At the edge of the grove, the figure finally stepped forward. Not fast. Not slow. Just deliberate. Closer now, Elia could see that its form wasn't solid. It was shaped like a person, head, shoulders, long limbs, but within that shape, the texture wasn't flesh or cloth. It looked like smoke held in place by memory. Like it had once been a body, long ago, but the forest had claimed it back, and now only the idea remained. It stopped a few paces away from her. Still silent. Still watching. Then, it reached out. Its hand, or the shape of one, emerged from the folds of shadow. It moved not like a limb, but like flowing ink in water. Graceful. Gentle. Open. Elia stepped forward and placed the feather into the space where the hand hovered. The moment it touched, the air shimmered. Not violently. Softly. Like a sigh. The figure held the feather for a moment, and then, without turning, walked backward. Slowly. Back toward the edge of the trees. As it moved, it began to dissolve. Not vanish. Fade. Like fog drawn upward by warmth. Like the ending of a thought you were never meant to hold on to. Within seconds, it was gone. Only the mist remained. And the memory of the moment. Elia turned back toward the pool. The surface, once still, now rippled gently. In its reflection, she saw the standing stones, and within each one, for just a heartbeat, a flicker of light. A breath. An acknowledgement. She sat again. And the forest, now darker, now deeper, exhaled around her. Part 10, The Sound Beneath. Elia remained at the edge of the pool long after the figure faded into mist. Night had truly arrived now. The golden haze of twilight was gone, replaced by a deep indigo that settled thick over the grove. The trees around her loomed like sentinels, their outlines blurred by darkness, but not erased. The lantern flickered softly beside her, its flame a small, warm anchor in the sea of deepening quiet. She should have felt alone. But she didn't. There was something beneath the silence, something steady and rhythmic, too low to hear clearly, but present. Like a sound inside sound. It wasn't the fire. It wasn't the wind. It came from the ground. Elia placed her hand flat against the earth beside the pool. There it was again. A thrum. Gentle. Subterranean. Like the slow pulse of a massive creature dreaming far below the forest. It was not alarming. In fact, it calmed her more than silence ever had. It was as if the world itself had a heartbeat, and now she was close enough to feel it. The pool shimmered slightly. She leaned closer, peering into the water's surface, and once again, it showed something other than the forest above. This time, it wasn't her reflection staring back, it was movement. A path of stones, descending into a dark, earthen corridor. Roots hung like chandeliers from its ceiling. And far below, in the shadows, a dim glow pulsed. Elia blinked, and the vision disappeared. The pool was still again. She sat back, her breath slow, her heartbeat calm. The path had been underground. Beneath the trees. Beneath this place. She felt the forest guiding her not away, not upward, but inward. Down. She stood. Carefully, she retrieved her lantern and cast one last look around the grove. The standing stones seemed still, but she felt the same low vibration in her soles as before. They were not stone alone. They were keepers. Gateways, perhaps. Or sentinels, like the figure from the woods. And now, they had seen her. She passed between two of the tallest stones, the space between them just wide enough for a single body. As she crossed through, her ears popped softly, like crossing into a different pressure. The forest beyond felt heavier, the trees older, the dark more settled. She followed no trail now. Just instinct. And sound. Somewhere ahead, there was the faintest whisper of movement, stone brushing stone. Not loud, not near. Just enough to let her know she was not the only one who walked this late. Eventually, the earth began to slope again. Downward. The moss gave way to thick, soft soil. The roots overhead curled tighter, weaving themselves into low arches. Trees leaned toward her from both sides, their trunks no longer separate, but interwoven. The lantern's glow flickered across markings in the bark, scratches, carvings, stories maybe, or warnings. She crouched beside one, a spiral, deep and clean, like the one she'd seen earlier on the standing stone. Beneath it, a set of 5 parallel lines. Fingers. Claws. The air was colder here. But not dead. She continued, her breath forming clouds before her. A new sound joined the pulse beneath the earth, dripping. Water, echoing softly through open space. She was close. And then she saw it. The opening. Not a cave. Not exactly. A gap between two massive stone slabs, half covered in moss, half buried by time. A place the forest had tried to hide, but couldn't close. She stepped forward. The sound grew clearer. From within the darkness came a steady, distant chanting, not in any language she knew. Not loud. Not near. But ancient. Elia raised her lantern. And stepped inside. Part 11, The Root Cellar. The lantern's glow spilled cautiously into the dark. Elia stood at the mouth of the stone opening, her breath caught in the cold air that rose from within. It smelled of ancient things, wet earth, mildew, and something older still, something dry and brittle like forgotten paper or bone. She tightened her coat and stepped inside, her boots crunching on a layer of gravel and old roots. This place wasn't a cave. It felt made. Not carved by time or water, but shaped by intention. The walls were narrow and close, each side packed with dark soil reinforced by stone ribs that arched overhead like the inside of a giant ribcage. Roots dangled down in long strands, thick as ropes in some places, beaded with dew that shimmered in the lantern's light. She could feel the forest above her, but now as a weight. A canopy of age and memory pressing down, not in menace, but in gravity. The chanting was louder now. Still faint. Still distant. But clearer in shape, rhythmic, slow, like breath formed into syllables. It came from deep below, echoing off the unseen walls of the tunnel. The words, or sounds, repeated in a slow, deliberate pattern. Not human. But not inhuman either. It felt like a language with no single mouth. She descended further. The ground sloped gently downward, the tunnel curving in wide arcs like a spiral. Occasionally, carved stones jutted from the wall, flat surfaces etched with shallow symbols. The spiral again, an eye split down the middle, a tree with its roots reaching upward instead of down. At one bend in the tunnel, she found something left behind. A bundle. Wrapped in dark cloth, set neatly into a recess in the wall. Elia crouched and gently unwrapped the top. Inside were items carefully arranged, a worn piece of charcoal, still stained with old markings, a stone pendant etched with 4 tiny holes, and a piece of parchment sealed with wax. The seal bore a symbol, a crescent moon inside a square. She didn't open it. Something told her it wasn't hers to read. She rewrapped the bundle and returned it to its hollow. This place had been used before. By others. Maybe not recently. Maybe not even in this age. But the path was not new. And she was not the first to descend. Further down, the tunnel widened. And the chanting stopped. It ended so abruptly, so completely, that Elia froze mid-step, her lantern held high, its flame swaying slightly from her motion. Silence rushed in to fill the space, not empty, but dense. Full of attention. Something knew she was here. She stepped into the chamber. It was a circular room, wide and low-ceilinged, its walls lined with rough-cut stones. A shallow channel ran around its circumference, filled with water so still it looked like black glass. The air felt thick with humidity and unseen dust. In the center of the room was a stone platform, and atop it, a mask. Not resting. Not displayed. Waiting. It was carved from dark wood, smooth and polished, with lines that curled like smoke along its surface. The eyes were hollow. The mouth slightly open. Elia couldn't tell if it was meant to look serene or sorrowful. Maybe both. She stepped closer. As she did, the air shifted. Not with wind, but with memory. For just a moment, the mask changed. Its eyes blinked. Its lips parted. Not in threat. In recognition. Elia stepped back, breath shallow. The moment passed. The mask was still again. But the chamber was not. Behind her, something stirred. A whisper. A footfall. A sigh. She turned slowly, lantern raised. And saw not a figure. But figures. Standing at the edge of the chamber. Cloaked in shadow. Silent. Still. Watching. Part 12, The Silent Assembly. They stood without sound. A circle of figures, tall and unmoving, lining the edges of the chamber like a forgotten council. Their forms were indistinct, cloaked in darkness, as if they wore the air around them. Their feet were hidden beneath the still water in the channel, their faces obscured by hoods, shadows, or something more deliberate. Elia did not move. She didn't need to. The silence between them was not empty, it was a conversation already in progress, one she had walked into mid-thought. She could feel it. The air was thick with meaning. With judgment, perhaps. Not harsh, but curious. Measured. They were studying her, weighing her presence against something unseen. She took a breath, slow and even, and placed the lantern on the floor beside her. Its light rippled across the water in the channel, casting a golden wash across the figures. Still they did not move. Not one breath. Not one sway. But she could sense their awareness. As if each presence in that room was a vessel filled to the brim with attention. Her eyes drifted to the center once more. The mask sat perfectly still on the stone platform, its wooden surface gleaming faintly. The air around it pulsed, not visibly, but in feeling. It drew the room inward. Everything seemed to lean toward it, like gravity had changed direction. Something wanted her to approach. Not the figures. Not the forest. Something deeper. She stepped forward. One step. Another. No resistance came. The figures watched, but offered no gesture of approval or denial. They were not gatekeepers. They were witnesses. Elia reached the platform. Up close, the mask was more intricate than she had thought. The carvings were not just decoration, they were lines of a map. Grooves, etched deeply in places and faintly in others, creating a winding pattern across its surface. She traced one with her fingertip and felt a shiver run through her hand. Not cold. Not fear. Memory. A flash of something not hers. A forest burning in slow silence. A voice humming a song with no words. Hands reaching through stone to offer something unseen. She pulled her hand back. The mask pulsed faintly. Behind her, the figures remained still. But now, one moved. The one nearest the entrance. A tilt of the head. A subtle bow. Not deep, not formal, but unmistakable. It was enough. The air in the chamber shifted again, like the closing of a circle, the final word in a long-spoken sentence. Elia reached for the mask. As her fingers wrapped around the edges, the room did not tremble. The figures did not wail. The stones did not crack. Instead, something opened. Inside her. Not a memory. A space. A knowing. She didn't place the mask on her face, not yet. But she understood it now. It wasn't meant to hide. It wasn't for disguise. It was a key. A tool. A vessel for seeing, and being seen, by something the forest kept deep. The channel of water stirred for the first time. Ripples moved outward from each figure's feet, spreading like soft drumbeats across the stone. And then the chanting returned. Soft. Distant. But rising. Elia turned. None of the figures had mouths. And yet, they sang. Part 13, the Psalm Without Voices. The sound rolled through the chamber like a slow tide, deep and full, yet without origin. The figures sang, but their hoods remained drawn, their faces unreadable, and no mouths ever moved. The song did not come from them. It came through them. It was unlike any melody Elia had heard before. There was no tune, no rhythm she could follow. Instead, it moved like mist, folding in on itself, echoing off unseen corners, layering tone upon tone until the air felt thick enough to taste. It settled into her skin like a memory. Into her lungs like breath. Into her bones like truth. She held the mask in both hands, its weight more symbolic than real. The carvings on its surface seemed to shimmer now, not with light, but with movement, as though the grooves themselves were reacting to the song. She could almost feel the lines winding around her fingers, like vines curling toward a trellis. And then the chamber darkened. Not all at once. The lantern dimmed first, its flame shrinking without smoke. Then the walls faded, not with shadow but with silence. The figures around her became harder to see, not because they moved, but because the space around them did. The sound swallowed the light. The water turned glassy black. Still, the psalm went on. Not louder, but closer. It felt like it was no longer just in the air. It was in her chest. In her skull. It hummed against her teeth and behind her eyes. She closed them and stood still, letting it carry her. Images came, not sharp visions, but impressions. A door, half buried in stone. A sky filled with roots. A creature with a lantern for a head, walking a spiral path beneath a sleeping hill. Then, silence again. Total. The song had stopped. Not faded, stopped. She opened her eyes. The figures were gone. The chamber remained. But the water was gone from the channel. The lantern was gone too. And in her hands, only the mask. She was standing alone at the center of the circular room. And directly across from her, where the nearest figure once stood, a new passage had opened. A tunnel descending even deeper, carved of rough stone, framed by two smooth pillars that hadn't been there before. Upon each pillar was carved a mark she now recognized without doubt. The spiral. It was no longer just a symbol. It was a direction. Elia placed the mask gently into her satchel and stepped toward the new passage. Her footsteps echoed now. Not loudly, but enough to suggest that the air ahead was wide. Ancient. Hollow in the way cathedrals are hollow. This was the path the song had shown her. Not up. Not out. But inward. Downward. She passed between the stone pillars. And the door behind her sealed with a sound like deep sleep returning. Part 14, The Descent of Sleepwalkers. The stone closed behind her with no crash, no echo, just a soft and final settling, like a tomb being tucked beneath the earth. Elia stood still for a moment, her fingers brushing the smooth pillar at her side, letting the weight of what had just passed settle in. There was no fear. Only stillness. And in the stillness, The same slow rhythm returned, the subterranean pulse she had first felt beside the pool. It was stronger here. She didn't just feel it in her bones now. She walked with it. Each step down the tunnel felt like a step into that rhythm, as though her movement was becoming part of a deeper beat. The new tunnel was colder than the last. The walls were rougher, unfinished. Not careless, but primitive. Stone pressed close on both sides, damp and cool, veined with narrow root systems and mineral scars. Drops of water fell steadily from the ceiling into small hollows along the floor, their plink 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 joining the rhythm of her footsteps like a second heartbeat. And then, she saw them. Carvings. Crude and ancient, lining the walls of the corridor in long, spiraling murals. Not written language, but images, scenes. Moments. As if someone, or something, had etched its memories into the earth so they wouldn't be forgotten. The first panel showed a single figure, small and hooded, standing beneath a forest of towering trees with glowing eyes. The second showed the figure walking a spiraling path into the roots of the forest. The third depicted the figure sleeping beneath the earth, while others watched. Elia slowed. The fourth panel had been etched more deeply than the others. It showed the same figure, but now with a mask. The figure stood at the center of a ring of standing stones. Around them, smaller shapes knelt, faces raised toward the masked one. Above the whole scene, a large spiral descended from the sky, like a thread dropped from some massive hand. She touched the edge of the carving. It wasn't prophecy. It was memory. A ritual that had happened before. Maybe countless times. The details changed. The figure changed. But the journey remained. The path into the hollow. The fire. The watchers. The mask. The door. The descent. The becoming. Because that's what this path was. Not escape. Not search. It was transformation. She continued. The air grew heavier as she walked. Not with danger, but with dreaming. The kind of weight you feel in sleep when the world above no longer matters, and only the strange logic of dreams remains. The corridor began to widen. The stone underfoot leveled, became smoother. Something had shaped this place. Then, up ahead, she saw movement. At first, she thought it was her reflection, cast in some trick of wet stone or hidden water. But it wasn't. There were others ahead. Figures. Dozens of them. Standing perfectly still in alcoves carved into the tunnel walls. Each wore a different mask. Each figure stood upright, as if waiting for something, but their bodies were coated in the pale gray film of centuries. Stone, dust, time. Sleepwalkers. Not dead. Not alive. Just paused. In some of their hands were objects, talismans, relics, feathers, lanterns. One held a bundle of charcoal. Another wore a pendant carved with spiral teeth. Their masks were all unique, some shaped like owls, others like tree bark or bone. None had mouths. Elia walked between them, heart steady. The sleepwalkers did not move. But as she passed, each one exhaled a faint mist into the cold air, like a sigh held for 1,000 years finally allowed to drift free. And at the end of the passage, a doorway. A real one this time. Old wood. Iron hinges. Set into stone. Elia reached for the handle. It was warm. She opened it. And stepped into a room filled with roots, candles, and the sound of something breathing just beyond the edge of the light. Part 15, The Room Beneath Roots. The door creaked softly on its ancient hinges, not out of resistance, but as if it had been waiting a very long time to open. Elia stepped inside. The room was low-ceilinged and round, like the belly of an old oak tree made of stone and earth. Its walls were thick with tangled roots that curled and stretched from every angle, some thin and hair-like, others thick as her arm, pulsating faintly with the deep rhythm she had come to know. They weren't just growing into the space. They were the space. The roots held the ceiling, formed the corners, shaped the very bones of the room. Candlelight flickered across the walls. Dozens of them. Thin, hand-dipped candles of uneven length, all burning low but steady, placed on shelves carved into the dirt, on flat stones, on broken bowls. Their flames didn't flicker, despite the draft that must have followed her in. They burned like memories, quiet and constant. And at the far end of the chamber, the source of the breath. A massive root structure loomed there, gnarled and woven together into a shape nearly human in form. It sat in a natural seat carved into the wall, its head bent forward, its arms resting on its knees. It breathed, not with lungs, but with the slow flex and shift of wood and fiber. It exhaled mist from a hollow at its core, like smoke rising from old embers. Not asleep. Not awake. Elia stepped closer, her boots silent on the packed earth. The root being did not move, but she felt its awareness like heat from a fire. It had no eyes. No mouth. But still, it watched. Not just her now. Her before. Her fire. Her footsteps. Her stillness. Her journey. This place was not the end. It was the threshold. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the mask. The moment it entered the light of the candles, the root being's breath shifted, faster, not urgent, but focused. The mask, in her hands, felt heavier now. Not in weight, but in meaning. She could sense the shape of every carving as if they were carved into her own skin. She didn't hesitate. She raised the mask to her face. The moment it touched her, the world fell away. Not into darkness, but into depth. The room, the roots, the candles, they didn't vanish. They became something more. She could see beyond them now. See through them. The forest above was visible like a living map stretched across the sky. She saw the grove. The stones. The hollow. The figures from the chamber. She saw the footprints that had vanished, reappear in spirals. She saw the sleeping forms in the walls breathing with her. She saw herself. And beyond that, something greater. The forest as being, not as place. A vast awareness, older than language, older than even the memory of fire. It had no voice, but its thoughts moved like wind through leaves, like water over stones. And it said, "You are the witness." Elia's breath caught. Not in fear. In understanding. She was not here to find something. She was here to remember it. To carry it. To walk it back into the waking world. The mask tightened gently to her skin, not binding, not trapping. Just joining. The root being leaned forward, its wood groaning softly, and from the hollow in its chest, it pulled something glowing, a thread of light, fragile as smoke, bright as embers. It placed it in her hands. It didn't burn. It warmed. The room pulsed once, like a drum beneath her feet. The candles bowed their flames. And everything went silent again. The thread pulsed in her palms. It was time to return. But the path would not be the same. Part 16, The Return Spiral. Elia stood motionless in the root-woven chamber, the mask pressed gently to her skin, the glowing thread held in her open hands. It shimmered faintly, neither hot nor cold, but alive in a way she didn't know light could be. It pulsed in time with something ancient, something vast. Not a heartbeat, not a breath, something older than either. A rhythm the forest remembered. She lowered her hands slightly, watching the light trace small arcs through the air as it moved. It felt like it wanted to return. Not to be discarded. Not to fade. But to complete something. Behind her, the room shifted. Not in structure, but in energy. The roots relaxed, sagging slightly as if the chamber itself had exhaled. The air felt clearer, thinner somehow, like the forest had offered her what it could, and now the rest belonged to her alone. Elia turned. The door that had closed behind her, sealed with such finality, was now slightly ajar. A narrow sliver of darkness beyond it waited, no longer a barrier, but an invitation. She stepped toward it. With every footfall, the soft hum in her hands grew fainter. Not because the thread dimmed, but because it was sinking into her. Becoming part of her step, her motion, her path. By the time she crossed the threshold again, the thread no longer glowed in her hands. It glowed behind her eyes. The tunnel had changed. The passage that had once echoed with her breath and steps now welcomed her like an old corridor in a home she had forgotten she'd built. The carvings along the walls were different now, subtly altered, no longer the journey of another, but hers. They showed the mask in her hands. The feather. The pool. The circle of watchers. The root being. At one point, she passed one of the sleepwalkers again, stone-faced, silent, unmoving. But this time, as she drew near, its head turned a fraction toward her. Not in surprise. In acknowledgement. Its mouth did not open. But from within its chest, a faint warmth pulsed in reply to hers. A thread of light flickered inside it, dim, ancient, and still burning. She walked on. The passage slowly tilted upward, the air growing less heavy with each step. The hum of roots gave way to the scent of rain-damp moss and deep forest floor. She was rising again, ascending through layers of stillness, through forgotten tunnels once used by those who remembered how to walk with the forest, not over it. Eventually, a soft glow returned, pale and silver, not from flame, but from the sky beyond. She reached the opening. It was not the same door she'd entered through. It was older, larger, a great arch of stone entwined with ivy and memory. Beyond it was the forest again, but not as it had been. It was brighter now. Calmer. The rain had returned, a soft misting fall that made every branch gleam and every leaf bow gently. Light filtered through in broken strands, and the forest listened, not just watched. Elia stepped out beneath the canopy. She expected silence. But the forest began to sing. Not with words. Not with voices. With sound, the wind through hollow logs, the drip of water onto stone, the rustle of ferns, the breath of fog moving between trees. It was the song of the spiral, and it followed her now, not as something to chase, but as something that moved with her. The ground beneath her feet no longer felt like earth. It felt like memory. And it remembered her now. Part 17, Ash on the Wind. The rain was no longer cold. It fell like a curtain of silk through the trees, beating gently on Elia's shoulders and catching in her lashes. The forest had deepened since her descent, not in size, but in silence. A profound hush followed her, not empty, but held. Like the forest itself was waiting to see what she would do next. She moved slowly through the glade, her boots brushing over soft moss. The trees here had changed subtly in shape. Their trunks were darker, more gnarled, their bark streaked with silvery veins that glowed faintly when touched by rain. It was as if the deep places beneath the earth had risen slightly to meet the surface, as if the world below had followed her upward. In her chest, the thread still pulsed. Not visibly. Not as fire or glow. But as memory. A soft rhythm that kept time not with seconds, but with meaning. She passed a cluster of stones, smooth, moss-covered, arranged in a crescent arc. In their center was a bowl, carved shallow into the ground and filled with black ash. Elia crouched beside it. The ash was damp from the rain, but it still carried a faint warmth when she held her hand above it. It hadn't been burned by fire alone. This was ritual ash. It had been placed here deliberately. Left as offering, or remembrance. She reached in, touching the surface lightly with her fingertips. A small gust of wind moved through the trees at that exact moment, not strong, but precise. It blew across the bowl and lifted a few flakes of the ash into the air. They didn't fall. They floated, drifting like feather-light charcoal, carried not on the wind, but toward something. Elia followed. The ash led her deeper into the trees, each flake pulling forward like the soft swing of a compass needle. The forest opened as she walked, not in clearings, but in mood. The branches leaned apart. The underbrush thinned. The world gave her space to pass, not because it was guiding her, but because she now belonged to its rhythm. Soon she came to a hill, not tall, but broad and rounded like a sleeping creature beneath a blanket of fern and lichen. At its center stood a single dead tree. Charred. Hollow. Its trunk blackened and split from long ago fire. It shouldn't have still been standing, but it did. And from its jagged top, thin strands of smoke still drifted, like breath that had never stopped escaping. Elia approached the tree and placed her palm against the bark. It was warm. Alive in a way that was no longer about growing or blooming. Alive in a way that remembered everything. This tree had been part of something sacred. Something burned, but not broken. The ash in the air drifted toward its hollow center and vanished inside. And then came the sound. Not a voice. Not the forest. But the mask. It pulsed against her skin, just once, and in that pulse, she heard. This is where they crossed. She didn't know who they were. But she saw them in her mind's eye. Figures stepping into flame not to perish, but to pass. Through the hollow tree. Through smoke. Through song. This had once been a gateway. A place between. A crossing not meant for roads or rivers, but for memory itself. Elia stepped closer to the hollow. Inside, the charred wood was smooth. Not naturally, but shaped. Polished by hands over years. Carved with spirals, circles, dots, symbols she had seen before in the underground, etched into the stones and masks of the sleepwalkers. She reached in. And felt nothing. Not cold. Not heat. Just the absence of surface. Her hand had passed through. The hollow wasn't hollow. It was open. She stepped back. The forest had grown utterly still again. Even the rain had paused. The thread in her chest pulsed faster now. Urging. Not demanding. But inviting. She looked once more into the black hollow of the tree, its breath of smoke curling outward like fingers. And then she stepped inside. Part 18, Through the Burned Gate. The moment Elia stepped into the hollow, the world folded. Not with a jolt, not with violence, but with the silence of breath held for centuries. The space within the charred tree was far too narrow to hold a human body, and yet it did. She did not press against wood. She passed through it, as though the tree were no longer a thing, but a threshold shaped from old fire. It wasn't dark inside. It was colorless. A pale gray realm without sky or ground. The tree vanished behind her like a mirage receding. There was no wind, no direction, only weightless mist, stretching outward in all directions. She stood on nothing. And yet she didn't fall. Her boots made no sound. Her breath didn't echo. She existed within this space the way a thought exists between dreams, shapeless and true. The mask, still on her face, glowed gently now, a soft pulse of golden warmth that kept her grounded, kept her Elia. The thread inside her heart unfurled like a map. And a path appeared. Not made of stone or soil, but of moments. Each step ahead shone faintly, like a memory caught in dew. As she walked, she began to see. To her left, a forest at dusk, the first fire ever lit by human hands in that grove. A circle of silent faces, masked, watching it burn with reverence. To her right, a storm unraveling the canopy of a forest that looked both ancient and unborn. A single figure walked into it barefoot, arms raised, laughing. She kept walking. The images continued, flickering at the edges of her path. A woman weeping into a carved bowl. A child placing a stone into the palm of a tree. A figure like the root being from the chamber, slowly dissolving into smoke as dozens of masked witnesses knelt around it. Elia understood, this place was the memory of the forest. Not its past. Not its future. Its essence. It held no time. Only story. And she was now walking inside it. Her thread burned brighter. Ahead, the path narrowed. The gray mist grew thicker, swirling gently around her ankles. It wasn't choking, but it slowed her steps. She could feel resistance, not physical, but emotional. Like trying to walk through a long-forgotten grief. Each movement forward pulled something old out of her. Doubt. Fear. Loneliness. She saw faces she tried to forget. Heard words that had once cut deep. Saw herself walking away from moments she should have stayed for. But still, she walked. And as she did, the mist thinned. The weight lifted. And before her, a new shape emerged. A door. Not grand. Not tall. A simple wooden door, half covered in ivy, floating in the mist with no frame to hold it. Carvings covered its surface, spirals, eyes, roots, and in the center, a circle filled with starlight. Elia reached out. The moment her hand touched the handle, everything she'd felt, the journey, the forest, the weight of memory, the light within, rose to the surface. And the mask whispered, "You are not returning. You are remembering." She opened the door. And stepped through. Part 19, The Forest That Waits. Light. But not sunlight. Elia stepped through the door into a place that shimmered with its own quiet glow, like starlight filtered through water. The ground beneath her boots was soft, not from moss, but from thousands of years of fallen leaves, pressed into memory. Every step released a whisper, not sound, but feeling. A murmur of those who had passed before. Above her, the trees stretched impossibly tall. Taller than any forest she had ever known. Their trunks were pale, almost silver, with bark that shimmered when she looked directly at it, then darkened when she looked away. The branches reached far overhead, and instead of leaves, they bore strands of glowing filaments, like hanging threads of light. They swayed gently in a breeze she could not feel. And yet she felt it. The forest that waits. That name came to her, not in words, but as a knowing. This place wasn't ahead of the journey. It was beneath it. The deep root of everything she had walked through. Not a forest of the world, but of the woven in-between. Here, things did not grow. They endured. She stepped forward, slowly. The forest held no paths. No tracks. And yet her feet found direction without thought. The glow above her shifted slightly as she moved, casting long slow shadows across the trunks. In those shadows, she saw things watching, not eyes, not creatures. Intentions. Shapes that formed not from matter, but from attention. They watched her not to judge, but to witness. To see if she remembered why she had come. The thread within her pulsed. And suddenly, the air changed. Not the scent, not the temperature, but the time. It slowed. Not just her body, everything. The drift of mist, the sway of the trees, the beat of her own heart. Each second unfolded like a dream that refuses to end. A leaf floated downward ahead of her, and she watched it fall for what felt like hours, spiraling gently in the blue glow until it finally touched the forest floor and disappeared into nothing. Then she saw it. Ahead, through the haze and tall trunks, a gathering of stones. Familiar. Circular. She moved toward it. The closer she got, the clearer it became. A mirror of the standing stone grove from the world above, but older. Undisturbed. Untouched by wind or time. The stones here were taller, worn with grooves that spiraled inward like water drawn into a drain. At the center of the circle sat a pool, identical to the one she'd seen before, yet deeper. Darker. She approached slowly. The pool reflected nothing. No trees. No sky. No self. Only black. She knelt beside it. The mask, still resting upon her face, began to grow warm. And the voice came again. Not from the mask. Not from the forest. From within her. Offer the thread. Her hands moved on their own. She reached inward, not physically, but with something deeper. She felt the thread, the light that had traveled from the root being into her chest. It unwound, shimmering with old breath, old fire, old sleep. She held it in her hands, golden and trembling, and released it into the pool. It touched the surface. And the pool came alive. Ripples spread outward, not as water moves, but like echoes. The black surface changed, brightened, until it glowed silver. Then gold. Then a deep, forest green. And in it, she saw not her reflection, but her memory. She saw herself arriving in the hollow. The fire. The first dream beneath the rain. The masked figures. The chamber of roots. The spiral tunnel. The ash in the bowl. And the moment she stepped into the burned tree, when everything changed, but nothing vanished. Then the vision changed. She saw the world outside. The world she had left. The people still walking. Still searching. Still forgetting. Still waking in the night with a deep ache they could not name. And again, the voice came. Now, you return. But Elia did not stand. Not yet. She waited. Because some part of her knew, there was still one more thing to see. Part 20, The Last Reflection. The pool glowed softly before her, calm now, its ripples stilled into a perfect mirror. Elia stared into it, but it no longer showed memories. No images moved across the surface. Only the faint glimmer of starlight shimmered at its edges. And then, her reflection returned. But it was not the version of herself that had entered this forest. It wasn't even the one who had descended into the earth, nor the one who had placed the thread in the water. It was older. Wiser. She wore the mask still, but now it was no longer a separate object. It was part of her face, fused by time and purpose. The carvings had deepened, no longer shallow spirals etched in wood, but glowing lines of light that pulsed in rhythm with the pool. Her eyes glowed too, quietly, with the gold of memory and moss, of candlelight and breathing stone. And behind that reflection, another shape appeared. It moved as slowly as thought, as gently as breath through sleeping lungs. A figure, massive and fluid, stepped up behind her in the reflection, not in the forest, but in the water. It was not humanoid, not rooted in shape or size. It was tree and fire, root and ember, wind and ash. It had no face, but it watched her. It had no voice, but it knew her. She did not turn around. She did not need to. Because she understood, this was the heart of the forest. Not a being. Not a god. Not a guardian. But the total memory of everything the forest had ever been. Every creature. Every whisper. Every step taken in wonder or in fear. Every dream laid down beneath the rain. It had waited here, not for her specifically, but for someone who remembered how to listen. The figure reached a limb, if it could be called that, into the pool, and the water brightened. Elia's reflection vanished. In its place, the world. But not as it is. As it could be. She saw the hollow, quiet and undisturbed. She saw the stone circle, no longer forgotten but tended, surrounded by travelers who came to sit in silence and feel the hum beneath their feet. She saw trees being planted. Fires lit for warmth, not for destruction. She saw children listening to stories beneath ferns. Elders remembering the shapes of dreams. She saw herself, walking the forest, not as a seeker, but as a guide. And the voice returned. Not aloud. Through her. Carry the rhythm back. Leave nothing, but the thread. Let them remember. The pool began to dim again, the images fading. And Elia stood. The mask no longer weighed on her face. The thread within her had been given freely. And the forest, this deep and glowing version of it, had no more to ask. She turned, slowly. The trees swayed gently above her, the glowing strands in their branches drifting downward like slow rain. And just ahead, through the trunks, was another arch. Not of stone. Not of wood. But of light. It shimmered in silence, a door without hinges, a gate without barrier. It was the return. Not a way back to what was. But a way forward, with what she now carried. Elia stepped toward it. And the forest began to hum again. Low. Warm. Full of breath. Part 21, The Gate of Waking Light. Elia moved toward the arch of light, its shimmer growing clearer with each step, not dazzling or harsh, but soft, steady, and knowing. It pulsed not with brilliance, but with presence. As though it was aware of her, aware of the journey she had taken to reach it, and of the weight she no longer carried. The roots under her feet softened. The air warmed. The song of the forest shifted, still deep, still slow, but now carrying something lighter within it. A note of release. Of quiet celebration. The tension that once hid in the trees, beneath the rain, within the stones, was gone. Elia paused at the threshold. Just before the veil of light. She turned back. Behind her, the forest that waits stood untouched. Its silver trunks. Its strands of glowing memory. The reflection pool, still and calm. The tall stones. The ashes. All of it held its place not in time, but in truth. She did not weep. There was no grief in leaving. Only a reverent understanding that some places must remain where they are, unchanged, eternal, waiting. She stepped through. Light passed around her, not over or into her. It moved with her. It did not blind, it revealed. As she walked through it, she saw pieces of herself return. Not forgotten, just softened. She saw the fire. The rain. The first dream beside the pool. The figure on the other side of the lake. The hollow roots and the breathing wood. The faces of those who had once stood silently in the chamber of stone. And then the light thinned. And the sound of falling rain returned. She stepped into the waking world. It was still dusk. But somehow deeper into evening. The clouds above drifted low and slow, their bellies heavy with mist. The forest had not changed in form, but the feeling of it had. The canopy seemed less oppressive. The trunks less ancient. Everything breathed easier. She stood once again in the hollow. The circle of stones surrounded her. The pool at the center shimmered with starlight, quiet and calm. No ripples. No storm. She reached up to her face and removed the mask. It no longer felt like wood. It felt like something grown, a part of the forest itself. She held it in both hands. And for a moment, she did not know what to do next. Then the wind picked up. Gentle. Carrying the scent of pine needles and memory. And with it came the faintest sound. Not chanting. Not singing. But breathing. From the trees. From the stones. From the rain. A deep, slow, unified breath. And Elia understood. The forest remembered her now. As she remembered it. She knelt in the center of the circle. And with great care, placed the mask in the grass beside the pool. She would leave it here. For the next who wandered too far. For the next who listened too closely. For the next who could not sleep. Part 22, The Hollow Sleeps. Night settled slowly over the forest. The rain, still soft, whispered through the leaves in a cadence as steady as breath, as ancient as root. Mist gathered near the earth, curling gently around the stones in the hollow, wrapping them like blankets around sleeping limbs. The fire from days ago was long gone, but its memory still warmed the soil beneath Elia's knees. She remained there in the circle, unmoving, the moss rising cool against her palms, the pool at her side reflecting nothing but stars. The mask rested beside her. Still. Quiet. It no longer pulsed. No longer hummed with unseen rhythm. And yet it held something now it hadn't before, rest. It had been worn, seen, walked. And now, like a tired witness, it had been laid down where it belonged. The hollow responded. Not with motion. Not with voice. But with ease. The wind curled inward through the trees. The water in the pool settled further. Even the usual stirrings of distant night creatures, the owls, the foxes, the soft scurry of life, had dimmed. The forest was resting. As though it too had crossed through some veil, and now sat quietly watching the stars arrive. Elia stood slowly, her joints stiff but strong. There was no urge to leave, no pull back to trails or torches or names. And yet, she knew it was time. Her part of the spiral had turned its full arc. Not to end, but to continue elsewhere. The forest had been waiting for someone to carry the memory forward, and now it would not wait so hard. It could sleep. And in that sleep, it could begin to dream again. She walked through the circle of stones, tracing one hand along their moss-covered flanks. Each one hummed faintly beneath her touch, not with sound, but with memory. As though they, too, remembered her. As though they had always known she would come, and were now content. As she stepped into the tree-lean, a soft sigh drifted through the hollow. Not from her. From the forest. And the mask, now alone beside the pool, caught a single falling leaf in its hollow. The trail home was no longer hidden. What once had vanished in spiral paths and shifting trees was now clear. Not carved, but simply present. The land itself no longer twisted around her, no longer tested her steps. It welcomed them. The moss underfoot was plush, the ferns dipped gently as she passed, and even the rain seemed to lean slightly aside, as if unwilling to trouble her further. She passed the broken log where she had first glimpsed the flickering eyes in the underbrush. Nothing waited there now. Only stillness. She passed the place where the crow had vanished in the sky. No feathers remained. But the branch it once sat upon swayed gently, though no wind touched it. And as she reached the rise that overlooked the small clearing where her first fire had burned, she paused. The ash was gone. The circle was green. A few small mushrooms had grown in its place, white, low, and glowing faintly in the rain. She smiled. By the time she reached the edge of the forest, dawn had begun to bloom behind the low clouds. A soft gray morning. No sun yet. Just the promise of one. She did not look back. Because the forest was not behind her. It walked beside her now. In breath. In thought. In dream. In rhythm. And far behind her, deep in the hollow, the mask remained. Waiting not for the lost, or the broken, or the desperate, but for the listener. For the one who hears the forest hum. And stops. And steps off the path. And follows it inward. The hollow sleeps. But dreams, always, are listening. Part 23, The Lantern Trail. Days passed. Or perhaps only one. Time no longer sat firmly for Elia. It stretched and curled like smoke, like fog drifting over quiet soil. Since returning from the hollow, the world felt slower. Not dull. Not distant. Just quieter. Like something had shifted deep beneath the surface of her awareness and was still settling into place. She had not spoken aloud since leaving the forest. There had been no need. Her steps guided her now, not toward villages or roads, but toward something unfolding. She carried nothing but her satchel, now lighter, emptier. And yet, she felt no lack. Her hands remembered the weight of the mask, though it no longer lay within. Her heart remembered the thread. Her breath remembered the scent of roots and ash and rain. And then, on a windless morning veiled with low mist, she found it. A lantern. hanging from a branch overhanging the path, not the carved wooden kind she had seen in the chamber, but iron, rusted, simple. Inside it, a flame glowed, not flickering, not blazing. Just present. Steady. She stepped beneath it, looked up into its glow. It hummed. Not a sound, but a resonance. A familiarity. Then she noticed the next one. 50 paces ahead, barely visible through the fog, another lantern hung. Then another beyond that. A trail of them, hung at irregular heights, some shoulder level, some far above, swaying faintly even without breeze. She followed. Each lantern she passed warmed the air slightly. The mist parted around them like curtains drawn back for a traveler. The path beneath her boots was lined with leaves she did not remember falling, soft, golden gray, each imprinted with faint spiral patterns. They crumbled gently underfoot. She passed 6 lanterns. Then 12. At the 13th, she paused. There, beside it, sat a figure. Cloaked. Still. Unmoving. Elia approached slowly. The figure was not masked. Nor was it fully visible. Its face was turned away, its hands tucked into its sleeves, legs folded beneath it as if it had been waiting for hours. Or years. Or lifetimes. On the ground before it lay a small bowl filled with water. And within that water, floating peacefully, a single black feather. The figure turned its head slightly toward her but did not speak. It did not need to. Its presence was a gesture. A remembering. An offering. Elia crouched beside it. She did not reach for the bowl, or the feather. Instead, she reached into herself, into the memory of the forest, the hollow, the chamber of breath and stone, and she breathed out. A small, silent breath. And the feather in the bowl stirred. Just once. The lantern above them flared ever so slightly. And the figure stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just, purposefully. It stepped off the path and vanished into the fog between trees, leaving behind only a faint trail of warmth in the cold. Elia stood as well. And walked on. The lanterns continued. And with each one, the air felt more aligned. More listening. She was being guided, but not in direction. In remembrance. Something was waiting at the end of this trail. Not a destination. A meeting. A reunion, not with a person, but with a part of the world that still remembered how to dream in silence. Part 24, Where the Fog Gathers. The lanterns grew farther apart. At first, only a few extra steps. Then more. Until Elia found herself walking long minutes between each soft glow, each moment of warmth. The mist between them thickened, curling in from the forest edges, rising in loose tendrils that danced along her boots and shoulders. It was not a threatening fog. It was curious, the kind that watched but did not follow, the kind that held its own breath. There was no wind. There were no birds. Only the hush of damp forest and her own quiet steps. And then, the path curved. Not sharply, but deliberately. It wound left, down a gentle slope lined with cedar roots and low rocks, until it opened into a hollowed glade. The fog here pooled low to the earth like a slow tide, thickest at the center where it lapped gently around the ankles of another figure. Elia stopped. This figure was different. Not seated. Not hooded. It stood straight in the mist, facing away from her, motionless as stone. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from its skin, even in the cool rain. The fog did not touch it. It parted slightly at the edges of its silhouette, curling back as if held at bay by something unseen. Elia took a step forward. The figure did not turn. But her thread pulsed again, not in her chest now, but in her hands. It was back. A golden glimmer appeared between her palms, glowing steadily as though it had never truly left. It felt lighter now. Less like fire. More like breath. The figure finally moved. It raised one hand slowly and pointed, not at her, not at the path, but upward. She followed the gesture with her eyes. And saw the tower. It rose above the fog, its upper reaches invisible in the mist. At first glance, it looked like a tree, its base twisted with bark and roots, but the shape was too deliberate. Too structured. It was a tower built from forest. From ruin. From memory. Elia stepped closer to the figure. Still it did not speak. But she could feel what it meant. This was the place where the memory must be planted. Where the thread she carried would take root, not in soil, but in time. The tower was not a destination. It was a seed. And the forest was ready to dream again. The figure stepped aside, allowing her to pass. As she moved by, she caught the edge of its face, only briefly. It was her own. Not as she was. As she had been. Younger. Lost. Afraid. A memory left behind to wait until she returned with what it had always been missing. She did not speak. She only walked forward. And began the climb. Part 25, The Tower Rooted in Rain. Elia approached the base of the tower, its wide, bark-covered sides rising into the mist like a tree that had forgotten how to stop growing. It was neither ruined nor pristine. It simply was, a structure the forest had built around something older than stone, older than story. Its surface was textured with roots that had grown into spirals, like the markings on the mask she had left behind. Tiny leaves sprouted in places, trembling slightly even in the still air. Lichen covered parts of the lower trunk, soft and pale, and faint moss lit gently beneath her touch as she placed a hand against the wood. The door was not a door. It was a space, an arch, like those she had walked through before. No hinges. No lock. Just a curve in the shape of passing. She entered. The interior smelled of damp earth and old fire. There were no stairs. No furniture. Just the inside curve of the tower, lined with shelves carved directly into the wood. Each shelf held a single object, nothing repeated. A child's wooden toy. A burnt feather. A stone with a hole worn through it. A piece of rope. A folded piece of bark etched with tiny spirals. They were offerings. Not to gods. To memory. She walked the inner circle slowly, her boots soundless on the packed earthen floor. As she neared the center, the thread between her hands grew warmer. Brighter. It didn't hum or pulse now, it called. The center of the tower held a hollow. A shallow bowl carved directly into the floor, lined with smooth obsidian stones. Rain had pooled there, gathered through a hole far above in the ceiling, falling in slow drops from the mist into the bowl's center. Elia knelt. She held the thread in both palms, now golden bright, no longer wavering. She did not need to think. She only placed it in the water. The moment it touched the surface, the water did not ripple. It sank. The thread vanished into the obsidian pool like ink drawn into paper. The rain fell silently around her. And the tower responded. The walls lit softly, not from flame, not from sun, but from within. Each shelf glowed around its object. The rope shimmered. The stone hummed. The feather, though soaked, lifted slightly as if on a breeze. All of them, those small, forgotten pieces, responded to the return of the thread. The memory was accepted. And with it, the forest exhaled. Elia closed her eyes. The sound of the rain faded. And in its place, she heard the spiral turn. Not forward. Not backward. Inward. 1,000 journeys, 1,000 dreams, woven through root and shadow and water and sleep, coiled once more into a seed. And she was its witness. Not its keeper. Its witness. She rose slowly. Her part was done. But the forest would dream again now, because something had been remembered. Planted. Carried. Returned. And somewhere far below, in the circle of moss and stone, a single mask waited beneath the rain, its hollow eyes turned toward the future. Part 25. The Tower Rooted in Rain. Elia approached the base of the tower, its wide, bark-covered sides rising into the mist like a tree that had forgotten how to stop growing. It was neither ruined nor pristine. It simply was, a structure the forest had built around something older than stone, older than story. Its surface was textured with roots that had grown into spirals, like the markings on the mask she had left behind. Tiny leaves sprouted in places, trembling slightly even in the still air. Lichen-covered parts of the lower trunk, soft and pale, and faint moss lit gently beneath her touch as she placed a hand against the wood. The door was not a door. It was a space, an arch, like those she had walked through before. No hinges. No lock. Just a curve in the shape of passing. She entered. The interior smelled of damp earth and old fire. There were no stairs. No furniture. Just the inside curve of the tower, lined with shelves carved directly into the wood. Each shelf held a single object, nothing repeated. A child's wooden toy. A burnt feather. A stone with a hole worn through it. A piece of rope. A folded piece of bark etched with tiny spirals. They were offerings. Not to gods. To memory. She walked the inner circle slowly, her boots soundless on the packed earthen floor. As she neared the center, the thread between her hands grew warmer. Brighter. It didn't hum or pulse now, it called. The center of the tower held a hollow. A shallow bowl carved directly into the floor, lined with smooth obsidian stones. Rain had pooled there, gathered through a hole far above in the ceiling, falling in slow drops from the mist into the bowl's center. Elia knelt. She held the thread in both palms, now golden bright, no longer wavering. She did not need to think. She only placed it in the water. The moment it touched the surface, the water did not ripple. It sank. The thread vanished into the obsidian pool like ink drawn into paper. The rain fell silently around her. And the tower responded. The walls lit softly, not from flame, not from sun, but from within. Each shelf glowed around its object. The rope shimmered. The stone hummed. The feather, though soaked, lifted slightly as if on a breeze. All of them, those small, forgotten pieces, responded to the return of the thread. The memory was accepted. And with it, the forest exhaled. Elia closed her eyes. The sound of the rain faded. And in its place, she heard the spiral turn. Not forward. Not backward. Inward. 1,000 journeys, 1,000 dreams, woven through root and shadow and water and sleep, coiled once more into a seed. And she was its witness. Not its keeper. Its witness. She rose slowly. Her part was done. But the forest would dream again now, because something had been remembered. Planted. Carried. Returned. And somewhere far below, in the circle of moss and stone, a single mask waited beneath the rain, its hollow eyes turned toward the future. Part 26, Descent Through the Quiet. The tower no longer glowed. Not visibly. But Elia could still feel its warmth radiating gently behind her as she stepped back out through the arch. The rain fell steadily now, not heavy, not cold, but steady. Each drop felt like punctuation in a language too old to speak aloud. She did not look back. The memory had been planted. The thread returned. The path ahead was her own now, not marked by masks or chambers or spirals, but by stillness. A different kind of silence. One that did not ask questions. One that did not answer them. The mist had thinned. The forest opened slowly before her, no longer tangled or winding, no longer a maze of shadows and whispers. It simply was. Trees stood spaced wide and tall. Their leaves swayed with purpose. The earth beneath her feet was soft but certain, and every footfall felt like it belonged. She passed no more lanterns. She needed no more light. The memory burned within her now, deep and rooted. Not as flame. Not as burden. As presence. Down the slope she walked, following no trail, letting her feet be drawn toward the rhythm she had long since joined. At the base of the hill, a shallow stream passed lazily through the trees. The water was clear and cold, full of smooth stones and half-buried twigs. She crouched beside it, touched the surface with her fingers. The water didn't ripple. It parted slightly, then returned, like it recognized her. Like it remembered. She dipped her cupped hands and drank. It tasted of cedar and rain. Of sleep and ash. Of stories not told aloud, but passed from breath to breath. And when she rose again, she saw something across the stream. A small structure, nothing more than a shelter made from woven branches and bark. It sat against the side of a low hill, half buried in moss and soft ferns. A faint curl of smoke rose from a hidden fire within. Not a blaze. A coal. A warmth maintained. Elia crossed the stream and stood at the threshold. The entrance was low. She knelt slightly to enter. Inside, it was quiet. The floor was soft with pine needles. A small, flat stone in the center glowed with the low red breath of coals, warming the air just enough to keep the damp out. Along the curved wall, someone, or something, had arranged bundles of herbs, feathers, small stones, and hollowed seed pods. It was not a home. It was a waystation. A resting place. She sat down before the coals. They whispered. She listened. Not to voices, but to belonging. And then, finally, Elia slept. Not out of exhaustion. Out of permission. And the rain, for the first time, did not keep her awake. It sang her deeper. Part 27, The Sleep Beneath the Ferns. Elia's sleep was not empty. It was rooted. It unfolded like soil turning gently under spring rain, like old bark peeling away to reveal younger wood beneath. She didn't dream in the usual sense, no images, no faces, no echoes of memory distorted by fear or longing. Instead, she sank. Not downward, but inward. There was no cold. There was no weight. Just breath. Just stillness. And in that stillness, something found her. It wasn't the forest. It wasn't the voice in the mask. It wasn't even the thread. It was a presence older than them all. Something that had never spoken to her directly until now. Not because it had been waiting, but because she had only just become quiet enough to hear. It didn't speak in words. It revealed understanding. She was shown a grove, far away, still untouched by human paths, still dreaming in green. In that grove, a child would someday wander, barefoot and lost. And in the moss, that child would find a stone. Smooth. Etched with a spiral worn nearly flat. And in holding that stone, the child would feel peace. Not knowledge. Not revelation. Just peace. And in that peace, they would stop walking. And sit. And breathe. And in doing so, the spiral would begin again. Elia smiled in her sleep. Because now she knew what she had become. Not a guardian. Not a prophet. A seed. When she awoke, the fire had gone out. The coals were dark but still warm. The rain had stopped. Outside, the air was full of light. Not sharp. Not blinding. A pale gold breaking through the morning fog, lighting the trunks of trees in long bands of honeyed glow. The shelter was empty but untouched. It had never truly belonged to her, but it had known she would come. She stood slowly, feeling the gentle ache in her limbs, the kind that comes from deep rest, not fatigue. The forest outside held a different sound now. Not silence. Not song. But readiness. Everything was still damp, the ferns, the leaves, her hair, but the heaviness had lifted. The weight of memory, the pull of the journey, the spiral of descent and return, it was all behind her. Not forgotten. Woven in. She stepped back into the forest, and her feet moved easily. No hesitation. No searching. Not because she knew where to go. Because the path would meet her. And ahead, through the trees, something flickered. Not a light. Not a figure. A shadow in motion. A ripple in the rhythm. And she followed. Part 28, The One Who Waited Beside the Hollow Tree. Elia moved through the forest like a thought remembered mid-breath. The trees were farther apart here, their bark smooth and pale, as if washed clean by years of gentle rain. Shafts of late morning light cut down through the branches above, illuminating motes of mist and pollen that danced as she passed. The forest floor was soft, thick with pine needles, scattered leaves, and something quieter beneath, a kind of old hush that had taken root and grown into the earth itself. Ahead, she saw it again. That flicker. The ripple. The sense of being not alone. She slowed, letting her breath fall into the rhythm of the place, letting her footsteps match the slow sway of the canopy above. And there, beside the hollow of a tree that bent low over a shallow stream, she saw the figure clearly. Not cloaked. Not hidden. Not distant. They stood with their back turned, long dark hair braided with bits of bark and thread, a weathered satchel at their side. The hollow tree beside them had split at the base, wide enough to crawl into, yet still alive, its crown green and high above. Elia said nothing. She didn't need to. The figure slowly turned. And she saw herself. Not in some metaphorical or magical sense. Not a vision. Not a dream. A true mirror. The same face. The same eyes. But older. Not aged by years, aged by journey. This version of Elia bore the gentle weight of choices, of trails walked again and again, of lives moved through quietly. Her shoulders were not heavy, but worn. Her hands carried calluses, not from hardship, but from returning. The two stood facing each other for a moment longer than silence could hold. And then, the older Elia smiled. "Now," she said, her voice low and moss-soft, "you understand." Elia nodded. No words were needed. The older Elia stepped aside, gesturing toward the hollow tree. "Inside," she said, "is the next place." Elia looked into the opening. It was dark, but not unknown. She felt no fear. No uncertainty. Only the sense of a circle closing. Of a new one beginning. Before stepping forward, Elia looked once more at her older self. "Will I forget?" she asked. The older woman shook her head. "You'll remember the important parts," she said. "The rest will be carried for you, until it's time again." And then she turned, and walked into the trees, leaving only footprints that the moss had already begun to take back. Elia stepped into the hollow. The wood was cool against her fingers. The roots above curved down like ribs. And as the light behind her dimmed, she exhaled. Letting go. Again. And again. Until all that remained was the sound of the stream, and the dark breath of the tree closing softly around her. Part 29, The Spiral Beneath the Stream. Inside the hollow tree, there was no ground. No walls. No roots. Only downward. Elia did not fall, she descended, slowly, as though the earth itself were drawing her gently into its breath. There was no fear. Only the sense of gravity being redefined, not as weight, but as memory folding inward. And then, her feet touched stone. Cool. Smooth. Wet with stream water. She stood in a chamber carved not by hands but by time. The walls curved gently around her in a spiral that reached down and inward, lit by bioluminescent moss clinging to the stone like veins of slow lightning. The air was thick with a scent that stirred something in her, old cedar, smoke long since cooled, and the first rain of early autumn. A path coiled to the left, sloping downward. She followed. Each step echoed softly, and beneath those echoes, she could hear a rhythm, a heartbeat not her own, but familiar. The heartbeat of the hollow. Of the tower. Of the forest. Of all of it. This was the place beneath all places. The spiral brought her deeper, and with it, the walls began to change. Carvings emerged, not of creatures, but of moments. A fire being lit for the first time. A masked figure walking into rain. A feather falling slowly beside a bowl of water. None were complete. Each was only a fragment, a single breath pulled from 1,000 stories. And among them, her own steps. Tiny spirals carved into the floor where she passed, pulsing faintly beneath her soles, as if the earth had always known she'd arrive. And then the spiral ended. At the center, a pool. But unlike the others, this one was not water. It was light. Golden, endless, slow-turning, like sap caught mid-fall. It hovered, liquid and weightless, and at its center floated a single object. The mask. Her mask. Returned. Changed. The wood was no longer plain, no longer carved. It pulsed like living bark. The spirals in it had deepened, overlapping into an ever-widening pattern that drew the eye inward until there was no center, only motion. Elia stepped to the edge of the light. She did not reach for the mask. She waited. And it rose to meet her. The pool lifted the mask slowly into the air. It turned gently, once, twice, and then hovered before her, perfectly still. Then, the voice returned. Not from the forest. Not from her memory. Not even from within. But from the space between all things. This is not the end. This is not the beginning. You are the thread now. And the mask came forward, not to be worn, but to become part of her. It pressed gently against her chest, and sank inward. No pain. Only knowing. And in that knowing, she remembered something even deeper than the hollow. That the forest does not forget. It only waits. Part 30, The Forest Remembers. Elia stood in the center of the spiral chamber, the golden light still gently swirling around her feet, the mask now gone, but not lost. It had become part of her. Not a weight, not a symbol. A rhythm. A memory that breathed when she did, that pulsed in her veins like sap through bark, like slow thunder far beneath stone. And the forest listened. Not from outside, but from within. There were no more paths now. No more lanterns. No more guiding figures or carved bowls. Only the stillness of having arrived. Only the breath of completion. Above her, far above, the trunk of the hollow tree arched upward through soil and root and time. Through it, the faintest shimmer of dawnlight filtered downward, illuminating the spiral one layer at a time. Not blinding. Not dramatic. Just present. Elia stepped back onto the spiral path, this time climbing gently upward, not as a traveler seeking meaning, but as a part of the forest rising to meet the morning. Each step sounded softer than the last. Each moment stretched. She no longer saw the carvings on the wall. Because she was one. When she emerged again into the open air, the forest greeted her like a friend seen after a long illness. The rain had ceased completely. The ground was wet and shining with dew. Every leaf on every branch glistened with the freshness of renewal, and the sky above was not gray anymore, but a pale, pearled blue, the first clear sky she had seen in what felt like lifetimes. And there, waiting just beyond the tree's roots, was a figure. Not a mirror. Not a stranger. Just another wanderer. Face not hidden. Hands open. Eyes wide with recognition, though no words passed between them. They simply bowed their head as Elia passed. Because they felt it. She had returned with something. Not power. Not prophecy. Only the deep, sacred memory of what the forest had always been. A place of silence. A place of listening. A place that remembers those who remember it. Elia walked for some time. Not toward a destination. But as a keeper of rhythm. The spiral, now part of her, did not fade, it grew. With every step across root and stone and moss, she planted it deeper into the land. Not so others could find her, but so that others might find themselves. And somewhere, far behind her now, in the hollow where it all began, a single tree began to flower. Soft, white blossoms opened against charred bark. And beneath it, resting in the moss, was a new mask. Unworn. Waiting. Breathing. Dreaming. Part 31, After the Spiral. The forest was not done with her. Though the journey had closed like the final note of a slow, ancient song, something beneath Elia's footsteps still whispered. Not with urgency. Not with need. But with invitation. She walked without knowing why. The path unfolded itself not in front of her, but behind. Wherever she stepped, the forest bent gently to make room, ferns tilting aside, mist receding like breath through a doorway. The trees were older here. Their bark darker, smoothed by age and rain. Their roots twisted through stone and memory. The wind was almost still. But not entirely. And it carried a scent she had not smelled since the hollow ash. Not the sharp smoke of burning. The cold ash of what had burned long ago. She followed it. Not because it pulled her. Because it waited. Ahead, the trees parted around a clearing she had not seen before. It wasn't overgrown, nor wild. The ground was flat, dry, ringed by stones blackened and split. At its center, a fire pit. Empty. Long unused. But something had once burned here that mattered. Elia crouched beside it. The earth here was quiet. Not dead. Listening. She reached out and touched one of the stones. It was warm. Not with heat. With memory. And in that moment, her breath caught, because she saw it. Not with her eyes. With her remembrance. This was the first place she had ever fallen asleep in the forest. Before the hollow. Before the spirals. Before the tower. A forgotten fire, beside a younger self, wrapped in a wet blanket and fear. Alone and uncertain. That night had vanished into the haze of dream and time. But now, it returned, clear as rain on skin. She stood slowly, and the trees around the clearing leaned inward, not menacingly, but protectively. A circle. A chamber. A memory sealed in moss and silence. And there, on a low branch beside her, hung a bundle of thin, blackened threads. They moved without wind. Elia reached out and took them gently. They crumbled in her hands. But when they fell to the ground, the ash did not scatter. It spiraled. A slow, smoky coil into the dirt. And in that moment, Elia understood. This was not a memory from her past. It was a future left behind. A piece of the spiral that had never been walked. A forgotten path she had once almost chosen. And the forest was offering it back, not to warn her. To show her what had healed. She stepped back, eyes closed, and let the ash continue its spiral. Not everything had to be walked. Some paths were meant to be witnessed, and then left behind, carried only in silence. Part 32, The Still Path. Elia left the clearing slowly. She didn't rush. The forest around her had quieted to such a depth that even her breathing felt like sound. The kind of stillness that only comes after long remembering. After something old has finally stopped echoing. The trail she followed was barely visible, more suggestion than path. A line of flattened grass. A scattering of small, smooth stones. A corridor of trees that leaned ever so slightly toward one another, forming a kind of hush between their trunks. The ash had stopped clinging to her boots. Now, it dissolved as she moved, vanishing into the undergrowth like dust returning to breath. She began to hear things again, not sounds, exactly. Presences. The gentle creak of a tree bowing under its own memory. The distant shifting of water through moss-soaked channels. The muffled wing beats of birds that did not sing. Even the silence here had layers, like listening to the forest breathe through 100 lungs. And then she saw it. The trail ended at the edge of a rise. Below her, a wide, shallow lake. Its surface was glass, reflecting the dull silver of the overcast sky, unbroken by wind or ripple. At the far end of the lake stood a structure so covered in ivy and bark that it seemed to have grown rather than been built. No firelight. No smoke. No door. Just a single arched window glowing with soft amber from within. Elia felt no fear. Only a strange kind of déjà vu. She had never been here. But something from here had once been part of her. She made her way down the slope, the grass wet underfoot but not slick. The lake did not speak. It held itself completely still, as though waiting for something very specific to happen, and only then would it allow motion again. The structure by the water was larger than it had looked from above. Not a home. A hall. It had no threshold, no fence, no signs. Only a sense of entry. She stepped through the curtain of ivy that formed the arch. Inside, everything was wood. Not crafted. Grown. The walls were curved, the ceiling sloped, and the floor pulsed with faint green-gold threads beneath its grain, like veins under skin. There were no chairs. No shelves. Only a single stone basin set in the center of the space. It was full of water. And floating in that water were objects. A thread. A feather. A smooth seed. A black spiral carved into bark. Her breath caught. These were not offerings. They were remnants. Not of her story, but of others. Others who had walked spirals, who had climbed towers, who had carried breath through silence and returned changed. This was not a place to rest. It was a place to bear witness. She knelt beside the basin. And the surface of the water shifted. Not from her movement. From recognition. A spiral of soft ripples formed around the seed. And a single word pressed gently into her thoughts, not spoken, not etched. Continue. Part 33, Threads That Never Broke. The basin held her gaze for a long while. Not because it changed. Because she did. With every breath beside that still pool, Elia felt something loosen inside her, a quiet unraveling. Not of herself, but of the things she no longer needed to carry. Worry. Old echoes. Names spoken once but no longer hers. They drifted off like steam, rising from her shoulders, dissolving into the space above. The objects in the basin remained where they were, undisturbed. But the water began to shift, slowly turning in a spiral that reversed direction every few minutes, like a breath going in, then out. And then, without sound, something surfaced. A single strand. Not golden, like her old thread. This one was gray, soft, frayed, and wet, but glowing faintly from within. It floated toward her across the surface of the basin and came to rest by the edge. She lifted it gently. It was warm in her fingers. And even before it touched her skin fully, she understood. This was not hers. It had belonged to someone else. And the forest had kept it safe. Elia stood and turned. The light from the arched window had dimmed to a dusky orange, like the end of a fire. Outside, the lake remained still, but a single ripple had begun to spread from its center outward. Slow. Wide. Intentional. The kind of ripple caused by something emerging. She left the structure quietly, ivy brushing her shoulders as she stepped into the evening air. The sky above was now threaded with thin clouds that glowed faintly as dusk set in. The ripple on the lake had grown, spreading steadily toward the shore. And then, breaking the surface, something rose. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a person. It was a shape. Smooth, round, and black, like obsidian pulled from the earth. As it rose, water streamed down its sides, revealing carved markings across its surface, spirals, thread lines, and branching paths. Elia knew it instantly. It was a memory stone. But not hers. This was someone else's spiral. Another journey. Another soul who had once entered the forest, once followed the path, once placed their story in the rhythm of the trees and vanished beyond it. And now, the forest had brought it back. Not to be studied. To be witnessed. Elia stepped into the lake, the water rising around her shins, then her waist. When she reached the stone, the water stilled again. She pressed her palm to its surface. The spirals pulsed faintly. And then, quietly, gently, another's journey bloomed inside her mind. Not fully. Not as vision. But as feeling. Cold. Fear. A small fire in a wind-rattled shelter. And a decision made in silence, to stay. To wait. To vanish gently into the trees and leave no trace. Elia understood. This person had not been lost. They had become part of the rhythm. And the forest had held their memory like a thread between roots, waiting for someone who would carry it forward. She opened her satchel, placed the frayed thread inside, and turned back toward shore. Part 34, Shelter Beneath the Remembering Sky. The light faded fast now. Not suddenly, but as if the sky itself had grown tired. The clouds deepened to a blue-gray hush, and the first stars blinked into view like eyes reopening after long rest. Elia stepped out of the lake, her boots dripping, the frayed thread tucked carefully away. Behind her, the memory stone slowly sank back into the water without sound, its spiraled surface slipping below until only a ripple remained, and then nothing. The forest waited. Not with tension. With readiness. She followed a gentle rise leading away from the lakeshore, through a corridor of dark-trunked trees whose branches arched high above her like ribs forming a cathedral. The path had no markings. No symbols. Only fallen leaves, many, many leaves, dry and soft, golden brown and silver in the starlight. And then she saw it. A small shelter. Low to the ground. Built into the side of a hollow hill. It looked like it had grown there, roofed in moss, ringed by stones, its chimney no taller than her knees. Smoke curled from it lazily, thin as thread. She approached slowly. The wooden door was slightly ajar. And warm light flickered within. Elia stepped inside. The warmth embraced her like a blanket that had waited for years to be picked up again. A small fire burned low in a hearth of river stones. The walls were curved, no corners. The shelves were carved directly into the earthen walls, and on each shelf sat only one item, a single bowl, a single folded cloth, a single small wooden cup. Nothing extra. But nothing missing. On a low bench beside the fire, a dry cloak had been laid out. Not recently. But not long ago, either. Elia stepped out of her damp clothes and draped the cloak around her shoulders. It was heavy, but not burdensome, lined with something soft, and smelling faintly of cedar smoke and night rain. She sat. The fire cracked gently. Outside, the forest had grown utterly still. Even the wind had stopped. She poured a cup of water from a stone jug set beside the hearth. It was cool and clear, and as she drank it, she felt something soften deep within her chest. Not relief. Not peace. Return. The spiral didn't spin anymore. It rested. Not gone. Just complete, for now. And as she stared into the fire, the cloak warming her shoulders and the frayed thread resting safely at her side, she understood. The forest wasn't offering her another trial. It was offering her a night off. A quiet breath between storms. A shelter not earned, but remembered. She lay down beside the fire on the woven mat, eyes open just long enough to see the flames blink softly, once, then again. And sleep found her like a familiar trail through old trees. Part 35, The Watcher on the Path of Crows. Elia awoke to silence so complete, it felt like a dream refusing to end. The fire had burned to ash. Light filtered softly through the small circular window of the shelter, not gold or gray, but a pale, soft silver. Dawn. But not the kind that came quickly. This was the kind that arrived on tiptoe. A cautious light. The first breath of a day that hadn't yet decided what it would become. She rose slowly, the woven mat still warm from sleep. Her limbs felt heavier, but not from weariness. From depth. As though every step taken had added another layer to her, pressed gently into the space between heartbeat and thought. The thread was still beside her. But something had changed. It no longer pulsed. It watched. She dressed, placed the thread into a small interior pocket in her cloak, and stepped out into the forest. The air was still. And above, on a high branch to her left, sat a crow. It did not call. It did not move. It simply sat, watching her, its eyes dark and wide. Elia stared back for a moment. And then another appeared. And then another. A dozen crows lined the upper limbs of the trees, spaced evenly as though they had grown there. Their feathers shimmered slightly in the silver light, black, but not quite. Iridescent with hints of green and blue and violet that shifted with every twitch of their wings. They made no sound. They only waited. And so, Elia walked. The crows followed. Not flying. Walking. Hopping from branch to branch, tree to tree, always just ahead or just behind. She began to feel their rhythm, the silent pulse of their movement, their watching, their presence. They were not leading her. They were walking with her. As witnesses. As rememberers. The forest changed as they passed through it. Not visibly. Not drastically. But Elia could feel the ground shift, slightly softer. The trees leaned, slightly inward. The sky, slightly darker. The air was not heavy. Just, close. After what may have been hours or minutes, the trees opened. A clearing again. But unlike the one by the lake or the one by the fire pit, this one was wider. Wilder. The trees circled it like an audience. And in the center was a tall stone arch. Covered in vines. Weathered by time. Unbroken. No door. Just a standing gate carved from smooth stone and set deep into the earth. The crows stopped. They perched in a perfect ring around the clearing's edge. And for the first time, one of them cawed. Low. Harsh. Final. Elia stepped forward. And passed beneath the arch. There was no flash of light. No sudden shift. Only a single breath. And then a change. She turned. And behind her, the crows were gone. So was the forest. She was somewhere else now. Not apart from the forest, but beneath it. Part 36, Beneath the Forest, the Hollow Sky. There was no floor. No ceiling. No trees. No walls. Just an expanse. Elia stood on ground that looked like stone but felt like mist, solid beneath her boots, yet shifting subtly with each step, as though remembering where she walked before her feet even touched down. Above her stretched an endless, dark dome, not black, but so deep a gray it seemed to absorb the faint light rising from the ground itself. There was no wind. No sound. No crows. But Elia did not feel alone. This place pulsed, not like a heartbeat, not like a drum, but like breath held, just before release. A stillness that came not from absence, but from expectation. Something here was waiting. And she was expected. She moved slowly through the dimness. Shapes emerged, not clearly, not at first. Only when she neared did she realize they were trees, not upright, but upside down, their roots reaching upward into the hollow sky like fingers, their trunks buried into the mist stone beneath her. Each root tip glowed faintly. Not with fire. With memory. She passed beneath one. And it spoke, not aloud, but in her skin. She felt a forest long gone, burned to ash, reborn through moss. She passed another. And tasted the cold air of a mountain long forgotten, where someone had once waited 3 nights for a vision that never came. Each tree held a past. A spiral. Not hers. But familiar. At the center of the space, the ground rose slightly, forming a mound made of roots curled tightly together. Upon it stood a single figure, not masked, not cloaked. Tall. Barefoot. Face weathered not by age but by silence. Their eyes opened as Elia approached. Dark. Reflective. Not human, but not either. "Do you carry the thread?" they asked. Their voice was calm. It didn't echo. Elia reached into her cloak and revealed the frayed, gray thread. The figure nodded once. "Then the spiral has chosen you for memory. Not to speak it. To hold it." Elia stepped forward. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice sounding small in the vastness. The figure tilted their head. "This is the sky beneath the roots," they said. "Where all forgotten threads are returned." They gestured to the trees around them, the upside-down giants. "These are not trees. They are stories. Buried so deep they became part of the soil. You are here because one thread still remembers its ending." The figure extended a hand. And in their palm was a bowl of water. Elia looked in. She saw herself, at the fire, in the hollow, beneath the tower, at the lake. And then she saw a path she had not walked. A grove. A mask she had never touched. A silence deeper than this one. The water began to glow. "Drink," the figure said. Elia lifted the bowl and drank. It tasted like starlight and rain on burned stone. And as the warmth filled her, she knew. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of someone else's. And she would carry it forward now. Not as a guide. Not as a guardian. As a vessel. Part 37, The Vessel Walks. The warmth of the water remained in her chest long after the cup was empty. Not like heat. Like presence. A gentle pulse behind her sternum, as if something ancient had laid down in the space between her heartbeats and chosen to sleep there, lightly. Elia lowered the bowl. The figure before her was gone. So were the trees. The sky beneath the roots had folded in on itself, quietly, without wind or sound, and become a tunnel of woven bark, damp with time. A passage, just wide enough to walk. No lanterns. No markings. But the wood glowed faintly, as though remembering sunlight. She stepped forward. The passage closed behind her. She did not feel trapped. She felt carried. As though the forest itself had become a vessel now, too, and she walked not through it, but within its memory. Her fingers brushed the walls as she moved. And with each touch, she felt moments spark through her skin. A child burying a small carved animal beneath a cedar tree. A pair of hands weaving thread into bark during a thunderstorm. A fire built in absolute darkness, its only light the breath of its maker. She recognized none of these. And yet, they felt entrusted. The passage turned slightly, then again. And ahead, a soft orange glow emerged, steady, pulsing slowly, like the last coals of a long-burning fire. She entered a chamber. Round. Low-ceilinged. Encased in tree roots that curved like ribs around its center. At the middle sat a stone basin. She knew it. Not by sight. But by weight. This was where the threads returned. This was where memory was kept, not stored, not hidden, woven. The frayed gray thread in her pocket pulsed once, then again. Elia stepped forward. And placed it gently into the basin. It did not sink. It floated. Then slowly unraveled, strand by strand, spiraling out across the water in a delicate bloom of silver-gray lines. The basin accepted it. No light. No sound. Just stillness. And then, one new thread rose in its place. Thin. Green. Unbroken. Alive. She reached out, and it wrapped itself softly around her wrist, twice, then vanished into her skin like dew into moss. A gift. A reminder. A seed for something that hadn't yet happened. She sat for a long time beside the basin, listening to the slow movements of the root chamber. There were no voices. No visions. Only breath. Only warmth. Only the spiral continuing, not as a task, but as a song softly hummed by the trees that had always known she'd come this far. Part 38, Rain in the Hollow Sky. Elia woke to the sound of rain, but not above her. Around her. The root chamber she had rested in now pulsed faintly with droplets striking the bark from unseen places. Not harsh. Not cold. A gentle, steady rhythm that seemed to hum in harmony with her breath. She rose slowly. The green thread had vanished entirely from her skin. No mark remained. But the feeling, subtle, warm, rooted, still lingered deep inside her, as if she had absorbed a piece of forest logic, some silent truth too old to be spoken aloud. The basin was still. But no longer glowing. Its work, for now, was done. She stepped into a narrow hallway beyond the chamber. This one was different. The bark was darker here, lined with veins of moss. The rain was louder, not falling from the sky, but slipping through tiny cracks in the wood, gathering in shimmering pools along the floor. Each puddle reflected not her face, but moments, memories not her own. In one, a hooded figure placing a mask into a river. In another, a circle of stones lit by a fire that gave no light. And in another, a single crow, alone, sitting atop a stone arch swallowed in vines. Each step carried her farther through these echoes, not to observe, but to remember with them. like the way grief lingers in a room long after words have stopped. At the end of the hall was a door made of layered bark and thread, woven tight. Waiting. Elia touched it, and it opened outward, not into forest, but into rainlight. She stood once more beneath the open sky. But the forest was different now. It had deepened. The trees around her were the same height, but they felt taller. The rain fell through the canopy like falling ink in water, slow and silver and full of sound. And before her, a campfire, unlit, ringed with wet stones. A circle that had not been touched in many seasons. But dry wood was stacked beside it. A single unburned coal rested in the center, untouched by time. And across from it, another figure sat. Quiet. Not cloaked. Not masked. But still. Waiting. Their eyes met Elia's, not with urgency or warning. Just recognition. The stranger did not speak. They simply lifted a small flint stone from the ground beside them and struck it once, bright spark, twice, brighter, and on the third, the coal caught. The fire began to burn. Low. Steady. Unbothered by the rain. Elia stepped forward and sat across from the figure. They both watched the flames for a long while. No stories passed between them. Because none were needed. The forest was telling it for them. Part 39, The Flame That Doesn't Burn. The fire crackled softly, but no heat rose from it. It gave off light, yes, deep amber and gold, flickering in a way that made the trees around them seem to shift, just slightly, as if the forest were breathing through the fire's rhythm. But there was no warmth. No smoke. It was a flame that remembered heat but had long since moved past it. Elia sat with the figure across from her. They still had not spoken. And yet, in the space between them, so much passed. Not thoughts. Not visions. But weight. Like the weight of stories unsaid, carried for so long they had grown soft and sacred. The fire held it all. Not as burden, but as a vessel. The rain continued to fall, light and steady, soaking the forest in a hush so deep, Elia could hear the droplets hitting the stones around the fire one by one. Each sound felt ancient. Each ripple in the puddles echoed with time she did not live, but somehow understood. The figure beside her reached into their satchel and drew out a small object. A mask. Half finished. Carved from light wood, its surface was bare on one side, and marked with curling spiral lines on the other. Not symmetrical. Not perfect. It looked like a story that had almost been told. They held it out to her. She did not take it. She looked at it carefully. And then shook her head. The figure smiled, not disappointed, but understanding. They set the mask gently on the stones beside the fire, and let it rest there. I thought it might be yours, the figure said, at last. Their voice was soft. Dry like bark. Worn like something that had spoken rarely and remembered often. It isn't, Elia replied. No, they agreed. But someone will need it. A pause. Then, the figure leaned closer, their eyes catching the firelight in a strange, flickering shimmer. Do you know why the fire doesn't burn? Elia shook her head. The figure reached into the flame with bare fingers and withdrew a small coal. It glowed like a heartbeat. Because it only burns what isn't ready to be remembered. They let the coal fall to the ground, where it went dim without sound. Then they stood. The rain picked up slightly, still gentle, still rhythmic, but now with the tone of parting. You've gone farther than most, they said. And slower than all. I wasn't in a hurry, Elia replied. The figure nodded, stepping back into the trees. You never are, once you become part of the story. Then they vanished into the shadows, no rustle, no footsteps, no farewell. Elia sat by the fire a while longer. Not thinking. Just breathing. The mask lay beside her, untouched. And when she rose again, she didn't take it. Because not every thread needs to be carried. Some need to wait. And the rain fell soft across her shoulders as she stepped once more into the spiral. Part 40, the place where threads begin. The forest no longer felt like a place. It felt like a breath. A slow inhale of memory. A long exhale of silence. As Elia walked through the rain-drenched trees, something had changed, not in the world, but in her perception of it. The path didn't wind anymore. It unfolded. Like pages turning in a book where the ending had already been lived, but was still unknown. Not because it was hidden, but because it was sacred. The trees had grown taller here. Not physically. In presence. Each one pulsed faintly with threads of color too subtle to name, some glowing gold, others green, or blue, or violet. Each tree held a spiral, not carved, but woven into its bark by time and rain and wind. She understood now, these weren't just trees. They were memory trees. Vessels. Not for facts. For remembrance. Some held joy. Others held sorrow so deep the rain slowed just to honor it. Elia passed between them, and with every step, the spirals inside her spun just slightly, shifting, adjusting, sinking. Not to tell her where to go, but to let her know she had always been going. And then, ahead, the forest opened, one final time. Into a glade ringed by ancient stones, each half buried and cracked with moss. In the center stood a low platform carved from layered root and blackened earth, as if the ground itself had chosen to rise. And atop it, a bowl. Wooden. Simple. Waiting. The same bowl from the hollow. The same bowl from the tower. But different. This one wasn't meant to hold water. It was meant to hold threads. Dozens already lay within it, curled, folded, spiraled into tiny nests of color and silence. Elia reached into her pocket and drew out the one that had come from the basin, the green thread. It shimmered slightly in the dusklight. She placed it gently into the bowl. It nestled among the others like it had always belonged. And something moved in the trees. Not a figure. Not an animal. Just awareness. A deep, rooted acknowledgement that this part of the spiral was complete. Elia sat beside the bowl. Cross-legged. Still. And as the light dimmed above her, as the rain softened to a mist, as the spirals in her chest finally stilled, she closed her eyes. And let herself be remembered. Far away, the forest breathed again. A low exhale through leaves and time. And in a tree not yet grown, deep in a place where no fire had ever been lit, a new mask began to form. Its wood soft. Its spiral faint. Its purpose unknown. But not lost. Just waiting. Waiting for the next thread to begin.